Go to Reykjavik, the retired ambassador said at my grandfather's graveside. Check in under his name. They'll know what to do. He shook my hand once, pressed a folded paper into my palm, and walked away before I could ask a single question. The cemetery in Lexington, Kentucky was the kind that felt permanent. Old trees, stone paths, a sky that couldn't decide between gray and white. There were maybe a dozen people at the service, most of them from the veterans' post my grandfather had attended for 30 years. I didn't recognize the ambassador until my cousin whispered something in my ear. Former U.S. ambassador to Iceland. 2 terms. Retired. I had no idea how he knew my grandfather. My grandfather was not a famous man. He was a retired Army Ranger who drove a used Buick, kept a vegetable garden behind his house, and made the best chess pie I ever tasted. He lived in the same 2-bedroom house in Lexington from 1987 until the morning he died quietly in his armchair, with the library book open in his lap. He was 81. His name was on no buildings. He gave no speeches. The only photo of him in uniform hung in the hallway of that house, slightly crooked, and he never once straightened it. My mother called me the night he passed. I drove down from Cincinnati the next morning. The house smelled like cedar and old paper. His reading glasses were on the side table. A crossword puzzle, half finished, sat next to his coffee mug. I stood in his kitchen for a long time, just looking at the ordinary weight of his life. My uncle arrived before noon. He is 10 years older than my mother, broader in the chest, and he has always moved through rooms like he's assessing property. He looked around the house the same way he looked around every room he entered. Not much to divide, he said. My mother didn't answer. The house needs work, he added. Roof's been neglected. He said it like that meant something about my grandfather's character, like a man who spent 40 years of quiet service should be measured by his gutters. The funeral was 3 days later, small as my grandfather would have wanted. The VFW post sent a color guard. The chaplain spoke briefly and well. They folded the flag and handed it to my mother, who is the eldest child, and who did not cry until she was in the car. I was walking back toward the parking lot when the ambassador approached me. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-70s, silver-haired, with the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture mattered. He didn't introduce himself by title. Your grandfather spoke of you, he said. That surprised me. My grandfather was not a man who spoke of people. He looked at the headstone for a moment, then back at me. Go to Reykjavik, he said. Check in under his name at the Borg Hotel. They'll know what to do. He handed me a folded piece of paper. On it was a phone number with a country code I didn't recognize at first, and the name of a law firm written in neat, careful print. Magnuson and Strand. Then he nodded once and walked away. I stood holding that paper for a long time. That evening I went back to my grandfather's house alone. My uncle had already started talking to a realtor, which I found out from my cousin in a text message that ended with a shrug emoji. My mother was exhausted and staying at a hotel nearby. I said I'd sleep at the house to keep an eye on things. That was mostly true. I walked through every room slowly. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to understand the space before it stopped being his. His bedroom was immaculate. Military corners on the bed, still. A small framed photo of my grandmother on the nightstand, the one who died before I was old enough to remember her. His clothes hung in the closet in order by color, not because he was vain, just because he was orderly. There was a logic to everything he did. I was starting to understand, even to things I had never questioned. In the hall closet, I found a fireproof box I'd never seen before. It was locked, and I didn't have the combination. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it like it might tell me something. In his desk drawer, I found a manila envelope addressed to me. Not to my mother, not to my uncle. To me by name in his handwriting. I didn't open it that night. I'm not sure why. I set it on top of the locked box and went to sleep in his armchair with the same library book open in my lap, the one he'd left there, because it felt like the right thing to do. My uncle called the next morning before I'd had coffee. What's the plan? He asked. For the house. The estate isn't settled yet. I know that. I'm asking about your plan. There was something in his tone that had been there my whole life. An assumption that he knew more than anyone else in the room, that decisions were his to steer. My grandfather had never argued with him directly. He just went quiet and did things his own way. I was beginning to understand that about him too. I'm going to take my time, I said. He exhaled in the particular way that meant he disagreed but didn't want to say so yet. After I hung up, I opened the manila envelope. My grandfather's handwriting was small and consistent. He had pressed hard on the pen. The paper was thick, the kind you buy intentionally. If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to explain it myself. I'm sorry for that. I was better at preparing than I was at talking, he went on. After I came home from service, I stayed close to a few men I'd served with. Not officially, no reunions, no newsletters, just check-ins. Some of them came home and found ways to rebuild. Others didn't. Over the years, I tried to help where I could. Medical expenses, legal fees, housing when things fell apart. I never wanted recognition for it. I just didn't want the gap to be something I watched and did nothing about. There is an account in Iceland. I set it up in 1998 through a firm called Magnuson & Strand. The ambassador helped me establish it legally. He is a man of his word. So are they. The account is not for me. It is not for the house or the car or any of that. It is structured. It has instructions. You will understand when you get there. I chose you because you listen. That is rarer than people think. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat at his kitchen table for an hour without moving. He had never once mentioned Iceland, not in 30 years of Sunday dinners and fishing trips and long drives where he talked about baseball and the weather and the price of seed corn. He had carried this the entire time and never let it show. My phone buzzed, my uncle again, just making sure we're on the same page about the estate. I put the phone face down and booked a flight to Reykjavik. I didn't tell my uncle I was leaving the country. I told him I had to deal with some paperwork from my grandfather's attorney, which was technically true, and that I'd be out of reach for a few days. He didn't like that, but he also didn't push it because he didn't want to seem too eager. My mother knew. I told her the evening before I left, sitting in the hotel parking lot in my car. I read her part of the letter. She was quiet for a long time afterward. He never said anything, she said finally. Her voice was very soft. No, did you know he had a passport? I hadn't thought to look. I went back to the house that evening and found it in the fireproof box, which I'd cracked with a combination I found written lightly in pencil inside the back cover of a worn address book, in a spot I only found because I sat there long enough to look at everything. 3 passports, actually, spanning 26 years. Iceland appeared 6 times, Germany twice, once, briefly Luxembourg. He had never mentioned any of it. I packed a small bag and flew out of Cincinnati the next morning with his death certificate, my own identification, and the letter from Magnuson & Strand. Reykjavik in November is something else entirely. The sky doesn't get fully dark, but it doesn't get fully light either. Everything moves at a quiet, deliberate pace. I landed at Keflavik and took a shuttle into the city, watching the lava fields pass outside the window, gray and still and older than anything I had a word for. The Borg Hotel was near the city center, old stone exterior, understated inside. When I gave my grandfather's name at the front desk, the woman behind the counter looked up at me and made a single, careful phone call. She didn't explain it, she just said, someone would meet me in the morning. I went to my room and sat by the window, looking out at the harbor. I didn't feel like someone who had discovered a secret. I felt like someone who was being trusted with something heavy, and wasn't sure yet if they were strong enough to carry it. The offices of Magnuson & Strand were a 10-minute walk from the hotel. They occupied the 2nd floor of a narrow building near the old town. The reception area smelled like old wood and warm coffee. A woman brought me a cup without asking. A man came out to meet me. He was in his early 60s, compact, precise in his movements, with wire-rimmed glasses and the quiet authority of someone who had managed important things for a long time without drawing attention to himself. I am very glad you came, he said. His English was precise. Your grandfather spoke of you with great regard. We sat in a private office. He opened a folder on the desk between us. My grandfather had established the account in 1998. It had been maintained through regular contributions over 24 years, invested conservatively and consistently. The firm had managed it with the instructions my grandfather had provided. He was an extraordinarily disciplined client, the attorney said. Consistent, patient, never impulsive. The words landed differently than I expected. I had always known my grandfather as steady. I had not understood until that moment how much intention steadiness required. He turned a page. The account currently holds just under $9 million. I heard the number, and then I heard it again in my head, slightly different. That's not possible, I said. It is accurate. He drove a used Buick. The attorney allowed himself a small smile. He did. He also declined every withdrawal request over 30 years except for the disbursements he authorized to specific individuals. The growth is the result of time and discipline, not any single decision. He walked me through the structure. The account was not a personal inheritance. It was a trust organized under both Icelandic and American law, designed to support a defined group of beneficiaries, former service members and their families, medical costs that veterans' benefits didn't cover, legal assistance for families navigating the system, college funding for children of men who hadn't come home whole. There are currently 11 active beneficiary households, the attorney said. They do not know the source of the support. Your grandfather preferred it that way. He slid another envelope across the desk. He prepared this to be given after his passing. I took it. My name was on the front in that same careful, pressed handwriting. My phone vibrated in my bag, my uncle. I let it go to voicemail. I opened the envelope that evening back at the hotel, sitting in the chair by the window, with the harbor lights reflecting off the dark water. You're probably surprised by the number. Don't be. It wasn't about the number. It was about consistency. I put in what I could when I could for a long time. Compound interest is just patience with math. The men I served with didn't all come home to the same life. Some of them had injuries that took decades to surface. Some of them lost jobs when their minds started slipping. Some of their kids grew up without the things they needed because the government paperwork was too complicated or the gap was too wide. I couldn't fix all of it. I could fill in some of the spaces. I set the trust up so that you would have oversight, not because I think you need more responsibility, but because I trust you to use it carefully. Your uncle is a good man in his way, but he counts things. I needed someone who weighs them. Don't simplify it, just keep it going. You'll know what to do. I folded the letter and held it for a long time. The harbor was very still. My uncle called again the next morning, and this time I answered. "Where are you?" he asked. The question had an edge to it. "Still dealing with estate matters. The attorney in Lexington said she hasn't heard from you." "There's another attorney involved." A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means my grandfather had financial arrangements that weren't in the will." Another pause, longer. "How much are we talking about?" I looked out at the water. "I'm still understanding the full picture," I said. "I'll call you when I'm back." "That's not an answer." "I know." I hung up. When I landed back in Cincinnati, my uncle was waiting at my mother's house. He had driven down from Louisville without telling anyone. He sat at her kitchen table with the same energy he always had at kitchen tables, like he was there to run a meeting. I set my bag down and sat across from him. He looked at me for a moment. "Tell me what you found." My mother was in the doorway. She'd already heard most of it from me on the phone, but she stayed quiet. She was good at staying quiet when it mattered. She'd learned it from her father. "He set up a trust," I said, "in Iceland, through a law firm he worked with for 24 years. A trust for what?" "For veterans and their families, people he served with and people who came after them." My uncle absorbed this. His face didn't change much, but something shifted behind his eyes. "And us? It's not structured as personal inheritance." He leaned back slowly. "How much?" I looked at him carefully. "Close to $9 million. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. That was unusual for him. $9 million, he said, and he lived like that. He chose to live like that. He could have. He stopped himself. He could have, I agreed. He didn't. My uncle rubbed his jaw. "You have control of it. I'm the successor trustee, and I get nothing." I held his gaze. "You weren't named. The trust is structured for a specific purpose. I'm his son. I know. He could have named me. He made a different choice." My uncle stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at my mother's front yard, the same oak tree that had been there since we were children. He stayed there for a moment with his back to us. "I'll talk to an attorney," he said finally. "I expected you might." He turned around. There was something in his face I didn't usually see from him, not anger exactly, something older than anger. "He never trusted me," he said. "Not with anything real." I didn't argue with that because I didn't know if it was wrong. What I knew was that trust and love aren't the same currency, and my grandfather had separated them very carefully. My uncle hired an attorney in Louisville. The challenge was filed 6 weeks after the funeral. Failure to disclose foreign assets in the estate proceedings, he claimed, along with undue influence and improper beneficiary designation. The language was formal. The intent was clear. He believed he was owed a portion of what my grandfather had built. I hired an estate attorney in Lexington who had handled international trust cases before. Her name was Deborah Crane. She was in her late 50s, deliberate, and she had the particular calm of someone who had watched families argue over money for a long time without being surprised by any of it. "The trust is valid," she told me after reviewing everything, "registered under both jurisdictions. Contributions documented, disbursements recorded. Your grandfather was meticulous. Will he be able to break it?" "He'll try. International trusts draw scrutiny, but this one was structured correctly and has a 24-year paper trail. That's not easy to challenge. He's going to argue my grandfather favored me." Deborah looked at me steadily. "Did he? I thought about it. He trusted me with this. That's different from favoring me." She nodded. "That distinction will matter." The first hearing was in a circuit court in Fayette County. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a courtroom that smelled like old carpet and copy paper. My uncle sat at the opposite table looking tired in a way I hadn't seen before. His attorney was sharp, aggressive in the measured way that courtroom attorneys are aggressive, every sentence chosen carefully. He argued that the trust had been established without family disclosure, that its structure prevented equitable distribution among legal heirs, and that the foreign registration had been used to obscure assets. Deborah responded point by point. The trust predated any estate obligation by 24 years. The assets were legally separate from my grandfather's personal estate. The existence of the arrangement had been referenced obliquely in the will, a clause about previously established charitable instruments, which satisfied disclosure requirements under Kentucky law. The judge scheduled a follow-up hearing and requested full documentation. Outside the courthouse, my uncle fell into step beside me. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Neither do you." He was quiet for a moment. $9 million, and he kept it in another country. He kept it separate so it couldn't be dissolved. "From me, you mean?" I looked at him. "From anyone who might make a different decision than he made." That landed hard. I could see it. He didn't respond. The ambassador appeared at the second hearing as a character witness. He arrived without announcement, sat quietly in the gallery until he was called, and testified with the steady authority of someone who had nothing to prove. He had known my grandfather since 1996, he said. He had helped him establish the legal structure of the trust in Iceland because of his connections there through diplomatic work. He had done so at my grandfather's specific request after understanding the purpose of the arrangement. My uncle's attorney tried to suggest the ambassador had influenced my grandfather unduly. The ambassador did not raise his voice. "He came to me with a clear intention and a detailed plan," he said. "I provided a legal pathway. Nothing more. He was not a man who was influenced. He was a man who influenced others, quietly, over decades." The judge recessed briefly. When she returned, the challenge was dismissed. The trust was valid under all applicable law. No evidence of undue influence, no improper disclosure. The petition was denied. My uncle stood very still when she said it. Outside, he didn't say anything for a long moment. He stood next to his truck in the courthouse parking lot, hands in his jacket pockets. "You really weren't going to bend," he said. "No." He looked out at the street, cars passing, someone walking a dog. Ordinary life moving around us. "He gave me money over the years," my uncle said. "When I needed it, I know. That wasn't inheritance. That was different." "Yes," I said. "It was." He exhaled slowly. I used to think he just didn't know what to do with money, that he was old-fashioned about it, didn't trust banks. He looked at me. He trusted banks, I said quietly, just not in the way you expected. My uncle gave a short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He opened his truck door and then stopped. Did he say anything about me? In the letter, I thought about the exact words. Your uncle is a good man in his way, but he counts things. He said you were a good man, I told him. He nodded once, got in his truck, and drove away. 2 months after the ruling, I was back in Lexington for a weekend, staying at my grandfather's house while we sorted through the final estate questions. The house hadn't sold yet. My uncle had dropped the idea of pressing for a quick sale. Things had settled into something quieter, if not fully at peace. I found the combination to the fireproof box on my first visit, but I hadn't gone through everything inside it until now. There were documents I'd already seen, and then there were 3 photographs I hadn't. One was of my grandfather in uniform, younger than I'd ever known him, standing with 4 other men in front of something that might have been a transport vehicle. They were squinting into the sun. He was grinning in a way I had never once seen in person. The second was of my grandmother at a kitchen table. I didn't recognize, laughing at something off camera. The third was of me, 7 or 8 years old, sitting on his back porch, holding a fishing pole and looking very serious about it. I didn't remember him taking it. I didn't know he'd kept it. I turned it over. On the back, in his handwriting, "She pays attention." That was all. I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time after that. In the spring, I drove to Richmond to see my uncle. He hadn't reached out since the courthouse parking lot, and neither had I. But something had been sitting with me, and I didn't want to let it become permanent silence. He answered the door, looking like himself again. Some of the tired had cleared. We sat in his kitchen. He made coffee. Neither of us mentioned the hearing. "The trust has a family stabilization clause," I said after a while. "My grandfather built it in. It allows for structured support to direct family members under certain conditions." My uncle looked at me carefully. "Conditions," he repeated. "Financial counseling, documented need, controlled disbursement, not a lump sum, not a windfall." I paused. "He didn't cut you off. He set terms." My uncle looked at the table for a moment. "He thought I couldn't manage money. I think he thought you hadn't yet. That's different enough that it landed differently." He was quiet. "He bailed me out twice," my uncle said. "I know that. I also know he never made me feel small about it. He wasn't trying to make you feel small now either." My uncle turned his coffee mug slowly in both hands. "You're saying there's something available, if you want it, on those terms." He was quiet for a long time. "The counseling part," he said finally, "that's non-negotiable. That's the structure he built. I'm not changing it." Another silence. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the block. "He really thought all this through," my uncle said. "He thought in decades," I said, "not months." My uncle nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He didn't say more than that. He didn't need to. A year after the funeral, my mother and my uncle and I went back to the cemetery in Lexington together. It was a clear morning in late April. The trees were just coming back. The stone looked the same as it always did. His name, his rank, his dates. Nothing extra. He wouldn't have wanted anything extra. My uncle had been working with a financial advisor for 3 months. He didn't talk about it much, but he had stopped bringing up the trust at family dinners, which was its own kind of progress. My mother stood between us and looked at the headstone for a long time. "He knew you'd go to Iceland," she said to me. "Didn't he?" "Yes. He knew you wouldn't dissolve it." "I think so." She nodded. "He always said the quietest people in a room are doing the most thinking." My uncle put his hands in his pockets. He said a lot of things I didn't realize were about me. No one answered that because there wasn't a clean thing to say about it. We stood there a while longer. The wind moved through the grass the same slow way it had on the morning of the funeral. Some things don't change. They don't need to. Before we left, my uncle crouched down and straightened a small American flag someone had placed at the base of the stone. It had gone slightly sideways in the wind. He didn't say anything. He just stood back up and looked at the name for another moment. Then the 3 of us walked back to the parking lot together, and my uncle held the gate open for my mother, and she thanked him, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I think about the photograph sometimes, the one of me at 7, holding that fishing pole with all the seriousness of someone who believes the fish can tell if you're not paying attention. She pays attention. He could have explained everything to me in life. He had decades. He knew I visited every Sunday. He knew I stayed close. But he chose to let me discover it after, the way he'd discovered his own version of it in service, the way you understand something more completely when you have to carry it yourself. There were nights in that first year when I felt the weight of the oversight. The disbursements had to be reviewed. The documentation had to be maintained. Beneficiary circumstances changed and had to be assessed. There was no dramatic ceremony around any of it. Just careful work month by month the same way he had done it. I kept thinking about one line from his letter. I put in what I could, when I could, for a long time. That's it. That's the whole thing. He didn't start with $9 million and a plan. He started with what he had, and he stayed consistent, and he let time do the rest. And while he was doing that, quietly, without a word of it showing, he was also raising a daughter who raised me, and spending Sundays teaching me how to be patient with a fishing pole, and pressing a little harder than necessary when he wrote my name on an envelope he intended to outlast himself. The trust will continue after me. He structured it that way. There are succession provisions, review boards, legal safeguards in 2 countries. He thought past himself, past me, past people he hadn't met yet. I used to think that kind of life, quiet, undecorated, deliberately small on the outside, was a kind of modesty. Now I think it was a kind of confidence. He wasn't waiting for someone to notice. He already knew what he was doing and why. The ambassador sent me a note after the ruling, handwritten, brief. It said only, he would be satisfied. Not proud, he didn't go in for that, satisfied. I keep it on my desk, next to the photograph of the 7-year-old with the fishing pole. If someone in your life lived quietly and you never quite knew why, if they kept things close and didn't explain themselves and left you with more questions than you expected, it might not be that they had nothing. It might be that they were building something they trusted you to finish. Pay attention. It's rarer than people think.